Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a story you probably think you know inside and out, right? But actually, we're going to look at it through a completely different lens. We're talking about the RMS Titanic. And we're not just looking at it as this tragic historical event, but really as a staggering marvel of early 20th century ambition, engineering, and luxury. I mean, this was a vessel built with immense pride, but it was ultimately brought down by completely, perfectly legal fatal flaws.
So it really begs the question, how did a marvel of luxury and engineering become history's most infamous shipwreck? I want you to just kind of keep this question in the back of your mind as we go through this explainer. It really establishes this heavy cloud of dramatic irony that hangs over literally every single engineering triumph and lavish detail we're about to explore.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap. We're going to look at the corporate race for the Atlantic, the engineering behind the Leviathan, life inside the luxury hotel, the lifeboat paradox, and finally, setting sail. Starting off with Part 1, Competing for the Atlantic, the race for dominance. The Titanic didn't just, appear out of nowhere. She was actually born out of this really intense corporate rivalry back in 1907. At the time, the White Star Line was facing immense pressure from its main competitor, the Cunard Line. Cunard, who were backed by the British Admiralty, had recently launched the Lusitania and the Mauretania, and these were the absolute fastest passenger ships in service. But White Star Line chairman J. Bruce Ismay, he made a deliberate, strategic pivot. Instead of trying to compete on raw speed, he chose to compete on unprecedented size and comfort. The whole plan was to build a new class of liners, the Olympic class, that would be the absolute last word in maritime luxury. Moving to Part 2. Engineering a Leviathan, Anatomy of a Giant. Bringing Ismay's massive vision to life required construction on a scale the world had honestly never seen before. Built over in Belfast by Harland and Wolff, this 10-deck floating city had its lifeboats right up on the top boat deck, descending down through these luxurious promenades, grand saloons, and passenger cabins, all the way down to the orlop deck below the waterline. And that's where the massive roaring engines and boilers were housed. It was like this hidden mechanical heart beating far below the luxurious passenger decks up above. No shipbuilder had ever attempted vessels of this size before. I mean, Harland and Wolff literally had to demolish 3 existing slipways and build 2 brand new ones just to accommodate the hulls. To actually pull this off, they constructed the Aral Gantry, which was this colossal 228-foot-high, 6,000-ton structure. They needed entirely new, massive infrastructure just to begin laying the steel plates. But we can't forget the human element here. Assembling a 52,310-ton vessel was staggering, highly dangerous labor. The hull alone was held together by over 3 million iron and steel rivets, hammered in by a workforce of 15,000 men. And remember, safety precautions in 1911 were rudimentary at best. There were 246 recorded injuries, and tragically, 8 deaths during the ship's construction and fitting out. So a tremendous amount of human sweat and blood was poured into that steel before it ever even touched the water. Now I want you to really look at this number. 600. That is the number of tons of coal that had to be shoveled by hand every single day just to keep the ship moving. This relentless, dirty, and incredibly dangerous work was carried out around the clock by 176 firemen working in the stifling heat of the boiler rooms way down below the waterline. To power all of this, the Titanic used a really brilliant combination of engines. 2 massive reciprocating steam engines provided 30,000 horsepower, and the exhaust steam from those fed into a centrally placed low-pressure turbine for an additional 16,000 horsepower. This combined system was absolute genius for the time. It maximized the motive power while drastically reducing those uncomfortable vibrations that plagued rival all-turbine ships. Basically, it ensured that the wealthy passengers up above felt like they were gliding on glass. Which brings us to Part 3, a floating luxury hotel, the pinnacle of comfort. The White Star Line wanted passengers to completely forget they were even at sea. And I absolutely love this quote because it perfectly bridges the cold, hard engineering facts we just covered with the actual immersive human experience of the ship. One passenger recalled that you would at once lose the feeling that we were on board ship and seem instead to be entering the hall of some great house on shore. The design inspiration wasn't your traditional manor house. It was actually contemporary high-class hotels, specifically the Ritz. Just imagine this sheer opulence for a second. A 7-foot deep saltwater swimming pool, a Victorian-style Turkish bath with hot rooms and massage rooms, a fully equipped gymnasium, a squash court, and a café parisien that was designed to feel exactly like a French pavement cafe, complete with wicker furniture and ivy-covered trellises. And of course, the solid English oak grand staircase crowned with that beautiful wrought iron and glass dome. Imagine the vibrant energy, the smell of fresh coffee and polished oak. There's just such a deep, dramatic irony knowing that all of this unprecedented luxury was destined for the ocean floor. But it wasn't just first class that experienced this marvel. The White Star Line completely broke the mold for third class, or steerage, passengers too. Instead of the open, unsanitary dormitories where hundreds were confined together, which was totally standard at the time, Titanic actually offered private, comfortable cabins for small groups, dedicated dining rooms, and adequate open deck space. The ship was truly a marvel of comfort across all class divides.
Moving on to part 4, the lifeboat paradox, the fatal flaw.
So this is where the story pivots to a catastrophic oversight. The public, and honestly the builders themselves, had immense faith in the ship, and that was fueled by its cutting-edge safety features. The hull was divided into 16 primary watertight compartments. There were vertically closing watertight doors that could be activated by a switch right on the bridge, or even by an automatic buoyancy mechanism if water reached a certain height. And these incredible technologies bred a really dangerous overconfidence. It contributed heavily to the ship's reputation as practically unsinkable.
But let me ask you this, and really think about what you know of the disaster. How many lifeboats did the Titanic legally actually need to carry under the Maritime Law of 1912?
Incredibly, the Titanic actually exceeded the legal requirements of the time. The British Board of Trade Regulations dictated that a ship of that size only needed 16 lifeboats, which provided a capacity for 990 people. The Titanic provided 20 lifeboats, accommodating 1,178 people. So yes, the fatal flaw that doomed hundreds of people was, remarkably, completely legal.
The glaring issue here? Those 1,178 seats represented only a fraction of the ship's maximum total capacity of over 3,500 passengers and crew. At the time, lifeboats simply weren't designed to hold everyone on board simultaneously. They were historically meant to act more like a ferry service, shuttling passengers back and forth from a sinking ship to a nearby rescue vessel. And as we know, this policy proved absolutely catastrophic when the nearest ship, the SS Californian, failed to respond to the Titanic's distress calls.
Which leads us to part 5, setting sail, the ticking clock. With the ship fully fitted out, manned, and loaded, the countdown to disaster officially began, and the timeline was incredibly swift. Sea trials only began on April 2nd over in the Irish Sea. The ship performed beautifully, hitting top speeds, performing crash stops, the whole shebang. By midnight on April 4th, Titanic arrived in Southampton to load provisions, recruit the massive casual crew needed to run her, and board passengers. And finally, on April 10th, 1912, she set off.
The maiden voyage was intended to be a totally straightforward transatlantic run, departing Southampton, making stops across the Channel in Cherbourg, France, and Queenstown, Ireland, before making that long haul across the Atlantic to New York. This was fully intended to be just the first of many routine, luxurious crossings on White Star's express service. But as we all know, that routine crossing was never completed. The Titanic stands today as a monument to human ingenuity, sure, but also to extreme hubris. It really forces us to ask, when ambition and innovation outpace caution, who pays the ultimate price for our absolute faith in technology? It's a question that honestly resonates just as strongly today as it did in the freezing waters of the Atlantic over a century ago. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.